The Flutter Nymphs are an original creature of Tergaenae, and there is one particular Flutter Nymph named Riri who has decided to show herself to you. So let me tell you all about the Flutter Nymphs and Riri in particular. My name is Ilza. I am a magic wielding Hamdina and a creator of worlds. And one of the worlds I have created is Tergaenae. And in Tergaenae you will find lots of Flutter Nymphs, if you know what to look for. So let's dive into Tergaenae and into the concept design of the Flutter Nymphs and the art process, for which I have brought along Andy Frazer, who is an amazing artist. The Flutter Nymphs are inspired by an aquatic creature here on Earth, the sea angels, or as they are also called, sea slugs. It is a tiny creature, between 2 and 7 centimeters small, so that's not much larger than your fingers. They are also called pteropods, and they live in the deep sea. Here you can see it in an amazing video from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Well, in the ocean they may look adorable, but in contrast to their cute name, they are ferocious predators. Sea angels, that is. And despite these sea angels belonging to the sea slugs category, their pace is far from snail pace. They swim at an astonishing 10 centimeters per second. That's rather quick. Now, when I saw that creature, I immediately knew that this was going to be a creature in Tergaenae. But not as you might think. Not an aquatic creature. Instead of living in the oceans, the Flutter Nymphs live actually in the rainforest, both in tropical rainforests and in temperate rainforests. And they are only partially predators, so they're a bit more friendly than the sea angels. While I was finding out more about the Flutter Nymphs and also about the sea angels and how other creatures might look like and might have looked like in the past, I talked a lot about it with my fellow fantasy author Linda Engelsgaard, who you might know as Dida on other social media, and also with Andy Frazer, who's an amazing paleo artist and who has also drawn fantasy creatures in the past. And he has incredible experience and knowledge about all kinds of paleo animals, creatures, and that really helped cement the concept of the Flutter Nymph. Now let's take a deeper look into the Flutter Nymph's behavior and find out how you might be able to spot one if you happen to visit Tergaenae at some point. After that, we will go into the art of the Flutter Nymphs. Like I said, their habitats, or biomes as you might also call them, are both tropical rainforests and temperate rainforests. And they build their nests in the trees against the stem or the trunk. But we'll get into that a little bit more later on. In late spring, summer and autumn for temperate climates, and wet seasons for tropical climates, they will catch and eat lots of flying insects, especially during the mating season and the time the youngsters need to be fed. And besides the insects, they also eat soft and ripe fruit, which they can find in trees, in shrubs, other small plants that are growing on the forest's floors. During late autumn, winter, and early spring in the temperate climates, and dry seasons in the tropical climates, they will also eat ground insects, albeit that isn't the most easiest for them, but at least where they can find them. And, also in the bark of the trees and insects that are just still flying around in those times. And not only that, I have an insider tip for you, which might come in handy if you are going to look for Flutter Nymphs. The Flutter Nymphs will also eat nectar from flowers. It is actually considered a delicacy amongst the Flutter Nymphs. If you want to attract the Flutter Nymph, bringing a bottle of nectar or 2 or more might help you in finding one of those Flutter Nymphs. They look at flowers in the trees, in shrubs, in all kinds of plants. Also the tinier plants that are more on the ground in the forests. Like I said, the ground is not the easiest territory for them. We'll get into that later on. Now that we know where they live and what they eat, let's look at their social behavior. Flutter nymphs are actually very social creatures. Outside the mating season, they will often live in large family groups, and the members of other families are also welcome at all kinds of gatherings. In the mating season, the males who have no partner yet will go look outside for a partner. Now, what you need to know is that flutter nymphs mate for life. Or when the partner of a flutter nymph happens to die, that won't be the easiest time for those flutter nymphs. They may go look for another partner, but often they don't. In that case, they will just remain with their family, or they will return to their family if they are alone. It's not the easiest time for them. Now, a family of the flutter nymphs will often live in one tree, in the big trees. And it's not only the parents with the youngsters, but it's also those who have grown up and decided to build their own nest in the same tree, in the family tree, so to speak. And the beauty of that is that the whole family helps out with raising the babies and the youngsters. And that, of course, as any parent amongst you might know, might be a little bit helpful for the parents. Their load will, be shared and make it easier on them. So what exactly is this mating all about of the flutter nymphs? Well, I've been told that during the mating season, all males will build a nest like a bit like this cup that you see from this bird. They prefer to build it in higher up in the tree under a mushroom, and the mushroom helps them to protect against predators and of course also the elements. If you can be protected from the rain, that's always better, right? Now, the males that already have a mate will either remodel the nest if it's still good and if the tree is still good. They might just adjust to accompany for a growing family. They might repair things if things have gone broken. But if the nest is really beyond repair, or the deities hopefully prevent that, but if the tree has fallen for some reason, then the family will go look for another tree. Usually it is the male who will go look for another tree and then build a new nest in that tree. And for the bachelors, they will just go look for a perfect tree, hopefully with no other competitors looking for that same tree. Then they will start building the nest. They use all kinds of materials, like just twigs, leaves, lichen, maybe some mushroom, all kinds of things that they can find that can beautify the nest, but more importantly also that can make the nest stable. Once they have found and built the nest, the males will try to attract a female by their dancing in the sky. And if a female is interested, the male will give her some fruit or other things like insects to, convince her to become his partner. And once she agrees, then they will be partners for life. And once she agrees, she will join him in the dance, and afterwards they will go to the nest to start their family. Their social behavior comes with a curious and inquisitive nature. They easily check out new surroundings, which sometimes comes with, risks. So yeah, it's not always the best that they are so curious and inquisitive. One thing is a good thing, and that is that they often have good connections with other small creatures like themselves, or creatures that are just a little bit larger. but not too large. The big creatures, well, let's just say that despite them working together with the dragons, large dragons, about 1,000 years ago, during the Big Divide, and when they tried to convince the deities to stop the Big Divide, to stop the planet from breaking apart, they still keep a healthy distance from these dragons, from the large dragons. They fear the large dragons might just consider themselves to be snacks. And of course, they want to avoid that. With the small folk, they have a very good connection. I mean, the small folk compared to you might look like children. For us, for the Flutter Nymphs, they're still very big. But the small folk are innately good people. The Flutter Nymphs feel that, and they have a good connection. And you can often find the Flutter Nymphs living in the ancient forest part of the rainforest together, or in the neighborhood of the small folk. And they will support one another if necessary, and that's a good thing. Before you may find a Flutter Nymph or any of the other folks living in Tergaenae, yeah, there are things that need to happen. The Flutter Nymphs will study you from a distance to gauge your behavior towards other creatures, towards other people like yourself. And if they deem you worthy, they might show themselves to you. If you happen to be an apothecary or a doctor or a healer, you might be in luck. If the Flutter Nymph regards you to be in a good standing, you might find rare ingredients on your doorstep or in the mail or hanging on your door as a, shall we say, a gift from the Flutter Nymphs to help you producing the medicine that you need to make. Now, because of their inquisitive nature, the Flutter Nymphs also can regularly be found working for the Inky Winged Beads, which is the newspaper in Tergaenae. The Inky Winged Beads is brought to all the folks by flying magical creatures, and it is made by magical creatures, and I can say, or so I have been told, let me put it that way, a magical press. I don't know exactly how this magical press works, but I hear it can produce the paper quite fast. The magical creatures just need to tell the press their information, and the press will make sure that it gets into the paper as it is supposed to be. And that paper then is brought to all the folks who have ordered it. I bet by now you're quite curious as to what the Flutter Nymphs actually look like. But let me give you a short description before we dive into the art process with Andy Frazer. These colorful creatures have the body of the sea angel, like you can see here. They have a long tail like a seahorse or a spider monkey. And they have a tactile pad at the end of their tail, which helps them to hold on to the branches of the trees. Their innate magic helps them to stay upright, so they don't hang from the branches. They have one pair of wings that can move fully from the front to the back. Well, I can't do that with my hands, but you can imagine it. Fully from the front to the back. Like you can see this sea angel doing here. They also have an extra limb, an arm or a tentacle, so to speak, with one finger, if you want to call it that. And that has also a tactile pad. It is part of the wings. It is, if you have the wing like this, it's partially tucked into the wing and it can hang from the wing, and they can freely move this tentacle, and it helps them with grooming, with picking and opening fruit from trees, picking up insects from the ground, things like that. So yeah, that really helps them. And for the beak, we'll get into that later on during the art design process. In contrast to monkeys, for example, Flutter Nymphs do not have feet nor legs. Instead, their innate magic helps them to stay upright. And halfway their wings, they also have tiny claws. These claws are more pronounced with the babies, and the older they get, the more hidden the claw is. As you may have guessed, the Flutter Nymph is a tiny creature. You can hold it in the palm of your hand. And like their inspirational counterparts, they are quite fast. But for those of you who know what to look for, you might find them. Due to their innate magic, the Flutter Nymphs leave behind a faint golden residue in flight. And this residue is most of the time what someone will see first before they actually see a Flutter Nymph, if the Flutter Nymph decides to show him or herself to you. Now, let's take a quick look at Riri before we dive into the art process. Riri is a youngster Flutter Nymph, close to becoming an adult. She is especially curious and inquisitive, which is why she has, at her early age, a job at Inky Beach, and she is considered a rising star there. She comes from a large family with several siblings who are still living in the tree with them, but also several siblings who are elsewhere living happily with their own family, but who come visit very often. She has siblings of her own age, siblings who are still younger, who have just crawled out of the egg, but also siblings who are, like I said, much older. If you are lucky, you will find Riri flying in Dragon City, around Devil's Port, and other busy places to get the latest news and to deliver these special packages for the apothecaries, when necessary, of course. And like I said, at the Inky Beach, she is considered a rising star, and with that come responsibilities. The High Council of Tergaenae has seen her achievements and have deemed her worthy to be a spokesperson between Tergaenae and us here on Earth. So you will soon find her in the Inky Beach news show here on the channel. Now that you know all the basics about the Flutter Nymph and about Riri, let's look at the art process that made Riri come alive. And there you will see more of the design decisions that I made. For those of you interested in more about the sea angels, I have linked the Ambari, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, the Ambari Institute, and the SciShow for more information in the show notes below. Andy, welcome in. I know you are normally making lots of paleo art, and you also make tiny dragons and big dragons for that as well. So what drew you into the Flutter Nymphs in particular?
Hi, thanks for having me. What drew me into this was the fact that it was such an unusual kind of project, in the sense that a lot of what I do is I illustrate creatures, either fantasy creatures, as you said, like dragons, and also real animals, dinosaurs. But with the Flutter Nymph, what was interesting was it wasn't just a creature; it was a creature and a character. And that's something that I don't often get to do in my work. Certainly my day job as a paleo artist is very much more science-led rather than narrative and sort of fantasy-led. And so the opportunity to work on something that was both a fascinating creature, but also a slightly more complex character, that's initially what drew me in, because it was obviously going to involve challenges that perhaps I don't face in my normal work.
Okay, well, interesting. That's good to know. Yeah, for me, the Flutter Nymph as a species is also very important for Tergaenae, because it has several roles in Tergaenae. And Riri, indeed, she is a lovely character, be it sometimes a bit, how shall I say that? She sometimes does things she shouldn't do, but all right, that's also part of her youth. So we talked a few years ago about the Flutter Nymph as a species. I asked your input also on the concept that I had designed because of your knowledge about paleo art and what you did with it all. I remember that I went to you because, I mean, I already was following you back then, and I had several of your books already, and I knew you were just the perfect guy, the perfect man to ask for this. And you showed me things like the claws, the tiny claws at the end, or somewhere in a bird's wing.
Yeah.
How do you work with details like that in your art?
Well, as you said, there's two sides to what I do. There's the fantasy dragon side and the science-led paleo art side. But what I find is that each feeds into the other.
Okay.
So in my fantasy work, whether it's the stuff that I'm doing for myself or the work that I've done for you, I'm able to draw on some of the scientific aspects that I've picked up from my paleo art. And you gave the example of the wings and the claws on birds' wings, which was a perfect example because in our early conversations, you gave me a couple of some really interesting things to think about in terms of the fact that that Riri has wings, sort of feathered wings like a bird, but is also dexterous. They have, for want of a better word, hands, and not really hands, but we'll call them hands. And that's quite an odd combination of characteristics. And you think, well, birds don't have hands and people don't have wings, and so how do you bring these different aspects together?
Yeah.
But what I was able to do was to kind of point to the fossil record initially and say that, well, we've got a precedent for animals in the form of dinosaurs having both winged feathers and hands on the same animal, and then also with a couple of modern day birds, those prehistoric characteristics have persisted. So there are examples, especially in young adolescent birds, where those dinosaur claws have actually been retained on the hands. They generally tend to be hidden by the feathers, so you often don't know that they're there. But that gave us like a real sort of scientific basis, if you like, for doing something that might on the surface seem quite unusual and improbable.
We talked about the concept of the Flutter Nymph in the past, and I contacted you a little while ago with a question if you could make the artwork of Riri, because I just knew that you were the perfect person to ask for this. And I'm so happy that you decided to do it. Thank you so much for that. Can you take us through the design process of the art of Riri? Because I can imagine that lots of people have just simply no idea what it involves when an artist starts to work on such an assignment. And what does it mean? What information do you use? Is it helpful to have reference photos or anything? How does that work for you, that design process?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that every process and every client is different, and some will come to me with a very fixed, established idea of what they want their character to be, what they want it to look like, right down to the finest details. Other people come with almost no idea and just want me to give them something that looks good, whatever that means.
Okay.
But in this particular case, it was, to be honest with you, it was the perfect balance of both. In that, you obviously had some very well established ideas of what the Flutter Nymph was, and you gave me a lot of reference material. But that reference material, it wasn't a depiction of what the animal actually looked like. You gave me examples of other creatures that you'd drawn inspiration from. In some cases, it was physical characteristics. In other cases, it was behavioral or just colors that you liked. And the other thing that you gave me that was especially useful to me was that you described the ecosystem and the environment that the Flutter Nymph exists within. And that's something that I always try and draw on in all my other work. It's this idea that all animals are essentially shaped by their environments. And so all their characteristics, both in terms of physical characteristics and behavior, that's really all determined by the ecosystem that they exist within. And you gave me quite a lot of detail in terms of behavior and also the development of this character from adolescent through to adult form, and also the whole broader ecosystem that they live within. And those kind of details, they're almost in some ways more useful to me than simple physical descriptions. I mean, the physical description is important. Obviously, you need to know how big these things are, how many arms, legs, eyes, whatever these creatures have. That's obviously important. but without knowing how they fit into a broader picture, it's quite hard to actually design something that really feels believable. And so what I did was I obviously went through all the reference material that you provided me, and I tried to pick out the aspects that I thought were most important and probably best defined what this creature would look like and how they would behave.
Okay, that's nice. That's awesome. I'm happy to hear that. Let's make it a small sidestep to something that has me, and I have a feeling you as well, has me worried about what's going on today, or these days, I should say. I mean, I specifically went to you because I know your artwork, and it grabbed me from the beginning, from the first artwork I saw of you. And I knew that I needed someone who could really portray, I mean, who could really portray the Flutter Nymphs and Riri in specific. I know there are people who are going to generative AI to get pictures. Now, for our audience, I don't support generative AI. That is something I really can't stand behind. But maybe, Andy, you can explain how important it is and what you can bring extra or better as a human artist than what generative AI can do at the start of this process, and maybe as we go along through the rest of the process.
Yeah, of course. I think the fundamental part of this is to understand what generative AI can, and more importantly, what it can't do, because that's really key to this. So what generative AI can do is it can very quickly produce a whole vast number of very nice looking images for you. You type in your prompt, you describe the creature, and you'll immediately be fed with a whole load of images that on the surface, superficially, might look quite good. But it's important to understand what's not happening behind that. And that is that the large language model, the AI, doesn't really understand what it's doing. There's no depth of understanding behind that. It's matching your words that you're typing in the prompt with the statistically most likely combination of pixels, if you like, to match those words. And what that means is as from your point of view, it's like the commissioner, as the person requesting the images, you're then put in a position of being given these huge number of images, and you're having to go through, and you're not picking the best one. You're picking the least worst. You're picking the one that gets closest to what you had in your head, but none of them will be actually exactly what you had in mind. But more importantly, because there's been no conscious input into those images, the AI can't do what I do, which is, or any artist does, which is to look at your words and interpret them and think not just what are these words saying in just literal terms, but what's behind them. What is the author or the commissioner trying to get to? What is it? What is their vision? What is it? And it's that conscious process, the fact that I'm consciously trying to interpret what you're doing rather than just throwing a whole load of images at you. I mean, you gave me certain key characteristics, for example, in terms of color and feathers and a prehensile tail. All those things you could type into a prompt, and it would be able to throw those things back at you, but they wouldn't be unified into a considered consistent design. And so then that puts the onus back on you, as I said, to kind of sift through all this. And whatever you end up with is always going to be a compromise, because it will never be exactly what you wanted. You'll always be looking for the least worst outcome. And it can never, I suppose the word, it can never surprise you in the way that an artist can.
Yeah.
Because it will always literally interpret your words. If you ask for blue feathers, AI will give you blue feathers. Whereas from my point of view, what I do is I think, okay, right, you said you want blue feathers, but this animal exists in a particular, let's say, a woodland environment, for example. So what kind of blue? Would it actually be blue? Would it be more of a blue tending to green? Might it be iridescent? If it is iridescent, because we know that some animals in nature have iridescent colors, why would it have those colors? Does that make sense in the context of this particular animal? All these different thoughts and ideas that I have as an artist and that you have as an author, that's not going on with AI.
No.
Ultimately, AI is an illusion. It's giving you the illusion of creativity because it is swamping you with all these images that looking at all those pictures. That must be creative, right? Well, actually, it isn't.
No.
It's a statistical output. And once you start thinking of it in those terms, then you start realizing why it probably isn't the solution for. I mean, in my point of view, it's not the solution for any author, but it certainly isn't the solution for someone like you who is looking for that something extra.
Yeah.
I think that's as you know, I'm as opposed to this stuff as you are, but I'm also not stupid. I can understand why, from the point of view of an author, especially an independent author that might not have the huge funding behind them and a budget for this kind of stuff. I can understand the superficial appeal of being able to get something, effectively for nothing. I understand that, and I'm not blind to it. I think once you scratch beneath the surface of that, you've got to say, well, what am I getting? Am I getting anything of value? Am I getting what my character and what my books deserve, quite honestly? Because you invest so much of your care and your passion and your time into creating this stuff. It deserves better than that. Your character deserves better than a statistically average output of pixels. It deserves care and thought and consideration. And I think it's quite a hard message to get over, but I do think it's really, really important.
I agree with you. I totally agree. And what I found while working with you these last few months and in the past, of course, as well, you were able to show me lots of different options of things that I had come with, and also let me think about it. And you came with your own suggestions as well, based upon the knowledge that you have as a paleo artist, and that's so valuable. I mean, that's something that AI can't give you. So let's have a look at some of the things that you came with. The first sketch that I got from you were actually multiple sketches, 5 of them. And I remember that in the beginning I had this idea of that snout or beak, whatever you want to call it, that a seahorse has. And you made that sketch front and center. And only when I saw that sketch, I was like, that's not quite, not necessarily, not what I had in mind, but it surprised me with the way it looked. And I was like, and you had drawn these other sketches with the beak on the one on the bottom right and the one on the upper left. Those were real bird beaks, and the other two are more how should I say that? I want to say lizard heads beaks, but it's not quite that. But and those last two, the one in the left bottom and the top right, those were the ones that really spoke to me, the heads that really spoke to me, of which I said, that's what Riri is. That's the cuteness that Riri has, and that little mischievous that already began to grow in that. And if I had asked generative AI just to give me an artwork based on what I had given you as well, then I think that that it might have come indeed with that snout of the seahorse, but it would have looked entirely different, and not with that cuteness that you brought in with those other sketches. And I think that's only one of the many things that you bring in as an artist, as a human artist, into this process and into the artwork. And I'm so happy with that.
No, I think that's a really good example, because, as you said, what AI could have done, initially you asked for a sort of seahorse type snout, and AI could have given you that in a second. But what it wouldn't have understood is the implications of doing that, which I understood as a human, and you understand.
Yeah.
I think what that comes down to is, because we're humans, we tend to relate to things with similar faces to ourselves. And the further and further a creature gets from kind of human facial proportions, the less and less relatable it becomes, and the more alien it becomes. And because Riri is not just a creature, but a character, we were kind of walking that line between making it look, unusual and, strange almost, but also relatable. And that's why anything with a long snout, like a seahorse, like a bird's beak, is so far removed from human facial proportions that we instantly start finding it hard to relate to. So the sketches that you connected with most are the ones you said almost like a slightly more lizard-like face, but it's also a much flatter face.
Yeah.
It doesn't project as far. And so it starts coming back towards slightly more relatable human proportions. And it's all these little things that we, as humans, we're kind of programmed to recognize these things, even if we don't consciously realize we're doing it. We're programmed to relate to things that look like us.
Yeah.
And the more something looks like us, the more we relate to it. And there's always other little details, like it's just simple things like the size of the eyes. I mean, the size of eyes does two things. First of all, it communicates the overall size of the animal, because by and large, small creatures have eyes that are proportionally larger relative to their whole bodies. And so by making those eyes the size that they are, even without having anything else to relate it to, you automatically realize that a flutter nymph is a relatively small creature, just because it has these proportionally large eyes. And of course, the other thing that large eyes do is it brings in that element, as you said, of cuteness. Because again, it's programmed into us as humans. Babies, whether baby humans or baby animals, all have large eyes, and it instantly triggers that cute response in us. It's always a very fine balance to find, because you want it to be relatable and cute to an extent, but you also never want to push it too far into like sort of cartoonish territory, because once you go that far, again you cross that line, and again it ceases to be relatable as a character.
Exactly. Yeah.
And again, these are things that, as humans, as a human artist, I do instinctively. AI would likely have given you a whole range of different versions, and the eyes would have been every possible size. You've probably had ones with huge eyes, ones with tiny eyes, and everything in between.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have known, it wouldn't have understood the implications and the consequences of doing that. And so, although a human artist is obviously slower than AI, this stuff takes me hours and days, not seconds. I think the whole process probably actually isn't that much longer, in the sense that between us, we were able to get this design narrowed down. As you say, I initially gave you 5 sketches.
Yeah.
Very quickly from those 5, you were able to narrow it down to 1 or 2. And then it only took us, I think, probably maybe 1 or 2 more drawings to get that refined down again to what was absolutely the final design.
Yeah.
And that's because I'm not just throwing random ideas at you. Every idea that I present has got some thought and care behind it.
Exactly.
And so that's really giving you, hopefully, although I'm giving you options, they're all viable and sort of sensible options to choose from.
Exactly. Yeah. For me, it was perfect. You said you brought in things from your background, and I want to dive a little deeper in that before we go to the next sketch. I remember that we talked about the tactile pad in the past. I had this vision of the Flutter Nymphs and of Riri that they would they would be in the trees and in a small nest or something, like a cup, like at the moment I don't remember the bird's name, but there are birds that are also really small, and they have a nest that almost looks like a cup. And I remember talking about it with you, and at some point you came with that idea, well, why, or not why, that it might be handy for the Flutter Nymphs to also have something that they can use to groom and to hold themselves on branches and something like that, because the Flutter Nymphs don't have legs. They have a tail and they stay upright due to their innate magic, but they don't have tails. And how would they groom, for example, without having the claws of their legs? And that's when you came with the idea of the tactile pads. And I looked into that, and there were actually monkeys that had those at the end of their tails that helped them navigate through the trees. You made those tactile pads, as we can see in that middle sketch here, and it made me think of a certain bird. Can you tell us a bit more? What gave you the idea on how to bring those tactile pads into Riri as they are in the sketch, and what was your inspiration for it?
Well, you're right to say that this does sort of connect back to my paleo artwork. In the anatomy of Riri's arm and hand was based quite closely on some of the dinosaurs that I've worked on in the past. Mm-hmm. And you're right that it was the thinking behind it was giving Riri a way that she could be both a winged flying creature, but also one that was able to interact with her surroundings in a very sort of precise way, in the way that we as humans can do. We can manipulate objects with high levels of precision.
Yeah. And
so one of the things that I did was the tactile pad. I mean, she obviously got some sort of clawed fingers there as well, but the tactile pad is on a very kind of extended long finger, which again is a characteristic that we see in dinosaurs and in modern day birds, because that long finger is actually where the flight feathers of the wing actually attach to. So they have, although you don't think of birds as having fingers, when you actually get down to the skeleton, they actually have this long finger that all the primary feathers kind of fan off.
Okay.
But the idea was, by making Riri's sort of tactile pad finger that much longer, it meant that she'd be able to manipulate objects without the wings getting in the way. If you had very, very short fingers, then everything you did, obviously the feathers would always be sort of mixed up with the fingers, and it wouldn't be a very precise way of being able to manipulate objects, which obviously was important in terms of the character and the story.
Yeah.
And so by giving her that longer finger, it meant that, you know, you'd be able to sort of manipulate things without the feathers getting in the way. And so although there's no example of dinosaurs having that kind of tactile pad, that was very specific to this project, I was able to draw on those aspects of the anatomy. And again, it all comes down to this thing about proportion and stuff. Like, how long do you make that finger? Well, you want to make it long enough that it's useful as a finger, but also not so long that it interferes with the function of the wing, and also not so long that it just looks strange. I mean, Flutter Nymphs by definition, they are slightly strange. They're unfamiliar to, compared to the animals we have around us today. Mm-hmm. But again, you don't want to make it so strange that it suddenly becomes unbelievable and comical looking almost. You want this to be a real. You want this to be a real thing. And so all those things, as I said earlier about the size of the eyes, the same with the size of the fingers or any other aspect of the anatomy. Whenever I'm drawing this stuff, you're always thinking, what size, what shape not only looks good, but what actually makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the other things that you came up with is the translucent membrane that goes to Riri's tail.
Yeah.
How did you come up with that idea?
Well, you gave me, in the initial brief, you gave me several images of sea angels as inspiration. And initially, I think you gave me those images more in relation to the horns on the head, which were taken kind of directly from the sea angels.
Yeah.
But they're such amazing creatures. I mean, we talk about things looking alien. I mean, these are real aliens. You know, they live on our world. They live on our world now, but I mean, they're just so strange. They're so different to Earth. It's the most amazing things.
Exactly.
But they've got this kind of sort of skirt, I guess, around the side of their body, which is actually how they propel themselves through the water.
Yeah.
It was such an interesting feature, and I wanted to give Riri a slightly more interesting silhouette, I guess. Rather than just having a body and a tail as two sort of separate things, if you like, by adding this skirt, it kind of blended the body into the tail, and that just made the whole shape of the animal just feel more coherent and more believable. And in my work, I talk about silhouettes a lot, because whenever we look at something for the first time, a person or a creature that we haven't seen before, as humans, the first thing we do is to look at the silhouette, to look at the outline shape of it, and then we go in and look at the details within that. And so whenever I'm designing a creature from scratch, the first thing I always draw is the outline silhouette, and then go in and fill in the details within that. Because if you've got an interesting silhouette, everything else fits into place, and everything else makes sense, and everything else is believable. Okay. What you sometimes find with, I suppose, bad creature design, if you like, is that people will take different elements. They'll say, "Oh, I want a tail like that, and a body like that, and wings like that, and a head like that," and you put all these bits together, and you've kind of given the person what they're asking for, but the whole thing just looks wrong. And sometimes you don't really know why it looks wrong. You just know that it does. Yeah. Usually that comes back to the silhouette. If the silhouette is incoherent, or if the transition from the body to the tail, or the head to the neck, if those things don't work and don't make sense, then nothing else works. And so by taking inspiration from the sea angel and that skirt, and using it to just smooth that transition from the body to the prehensile tail, it's one of those things. It seemed like an odd choice. I thought, well, does this make sense? But as soon as you do it, you look and you think, oh, yeah, it works. And again, it makes a flutter nymph something different from we're used to seeing animals with tails. We're used to seeing birds with tails of a sort. We're not used to seeing terrestrial animals with these kind of translucent, wavy skirts. Yeah. So it was just a way of making it different.
Yeah. Perfect. I remember that from those initial 5 sketches, we went to 3 head. So we looked at the seahorse snout, and the other 2 that you and the other 2. And the fun thing is, you added a tongue, a very long tongue, in the 3rd sketch in the 2nd set that you gave me. What made you think to incorporate that tongue in the design? Because that was, I mean, I had it in my mind, but I never envisioned it to be in the sketch. And the moment I saw it, I was like, that's fun, that's nice.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of reasons. I mean, on a very sort of simplistic reason, you'd given hummingbirds as one of your references, and of course hummingbirds have these extremely long extendable tongues. But it was also in the design process, because we'd gone from this very long snout, this seahorse snout, to a slightly flatter face. What I didn't want to do was to lose all the character and all the unusualness from that initial design. And so I thought, okay, well, we've flattened the face. In some way, the head, the final head that we've settled upon, is a much more simple shape than the initial seahorse head. It's it's quite smooth and a relatively sort of simple shape. And I thought, well, that's great, and I think that makes sense. But I don't want to lose all of those unusual aspects. I want to reintroduce something, just a little bit of, I guess, weirdness, for want of a better word, weirdness is good.
Yeah,
Weirdness is what makes things interesting.
exactly.
And so by reintroducing a tongue that is so different from ours, and perhaps
Yeah.
so different from what you might expect from an animal with that shape of head. We're not used to seeing things with short heads, but very long tongues.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it was, again, just a way of just making it different and hopefully a little bit unexpected.
It certainly was, and I really loved it. And I still do. We looked at those three sets of heads. One because of because of the beak, or the snout, but also because of the horns, or the horns. I remember that I didn't know exactly what would be the handiest. In my original thought, I was like, okay, so the baby Flutter Nymphs have these tiny horns, and by the end they will have those huge majestic horns, like the sea angel has in this photo. And the fun thing is, like I said earlier, the sea angel is a predatory creature, and these horns, what I call horns, are used to grab their food. So they have a certain they come from the creature and they go back later on. But I was wondering. I remember that I was wondering, wouldn't it be too much to have it all, or would it be too little? Things like that. And also, what I originally had in mind, the adults will have the full horns, will have all the horns, and the teenagers will have smaller horns. So we talked about that, and you gave me these three sketches. What for you worked the best, and what was for you the reasons? What were for you the reasons to make certain horns in a certain way?
It really came back to, I guess, what we've been talking about in the rest of this process, which is to take the inspiration, the ideas that you gave me, and to put them onto Riri, but to adapt them in such a way that they made sense and didn't just look stuck on. And so with those three head sketches, it was a lot about sort of looking at the size. I mean, you'd referenced the size in your notes to me, the idea of these, changing in size through the lifespan of the animal. But it wasn't just about that. It was, I knew that they got from small to large as the animal matured, but from how small to how large. And so it was a case of just sort of finding that balance and exploring through those different sketches, exploring the different options in terms of size and how that changed, again, back to what I said earlier, how that changed the whole silhouette of the animal, how it changed our perception of the face as a relatable character. And again, just find that balance. Happily, and I've got to say this doesn't always happen, happily, the option that you went for was the one that I also felt most comfortable with. It's always giving options to a client. It's what we have to do as illustrators, and it's part of the job, and it's an important part of the job. It's always fraught with a little bit of peril because you give a client these options, and there's always one or two that you think, I really hope they don't go for this one. There's always, and if they do, they do, and it's fine, and it's their illustration at the end of the day. But you're always in the back of your mind, you're just thinking, I sort of wish I hadn't gone for that one. And so in instances like this, where you go for the one that in my head was kind of my preferred option as well, it does make things. It does make things a lot easier. And it's a part of what I do in my, I guess, sort of fantasy illustration side. It's a problem that doesn't exist in my paleo art work, because in the paleo art, you've always got the fossil record to refer back to. So there's you're not worried about clients making crazy decisions because they're bound by the science in the same way that I am as an illustrator.
Yeah.
As soon as you get into the fantasy side, it's always a little bit more interesting because people can always surprise you.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So looking further at the process, you gave me the sketches, and then you go to the final sketch. I call it the black, white, gray sketch.
Yeah.
There we also see a little bit more of the fur on Riri's head, and the progress of the feathers to the fur on the wings and on her body. When you go from those initial sketches to this black and white sketch, what is that process like, and how? Because here you have more details that you didn't have in the earlier sketch. So how does that work for you in this part of the process?
There were two purposes really to that sketch. The first one was just to tweak some of the details very slightly. I think I refined the pose a little bit, and the way the tail wrapped around the branch. And those weren't changes to the actual design itself. It was just me adjusting things to make things feel a little bit more balanced. I think the creature felt slightly kind of off center and not quite sort of seated properly on the branch. So that was one of the purposes. And again, I slightly tweaked the proportions of the head, the body, and the wings. Very, very minor changes that probably a lot of people wouldn't even notice, but they just felt right. You know, it just kind of there's extra little details that just really kind of bring it all together. But the other purpose of adding those extra details is really more for my benefit in terms of when I then progress on to the next stage, because all the details in that black, white, and grey sketch that you've got, they're all the details that I then adhere to and follow closely when I'm doing the final colour illustration. So it's as much a guide for me, really, at that point, ensuring that things sort of stay consistent, because as you do each of these stages, you know, from the very first rough sketches through to the more refined final sketches, things do change. They naturally kind of evolve, and as a human artist, you never do the same. You can draw the same thing multiple times. You'll never draw it exactly the same way twice.
Okay.
And so there's a danger in that when you redraw things each time, sometimes things improve, but also sometimes you can lose some of the details that you'd agreed on and established in an earlier sketch.
Okay.
So by doing this final detailed sketch, this is really a way of me kind of like almost like making notes, if you like, saying, right, these are the things that need to be there. This is what we've agreed on. This is what it looks like. And by making sure those details are there in black and white on paper, it means that I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to stray away from the concept that we've agreed upon. And it means hopefully there won't be any surprises for you, or unpleasant surprise, at least at that final step when you then see the final illustration.
Oh, perfect. Well, moving on to the final illustration, and that is the colored illustration. Let me grab yes, there we are. You made the illustration, and then also with the background. I gave you some colors, and also said, okay, I have this vision in mind, but if colors need to be different, I mean, I'm not an artist, so please advise me if things need to be really different. And when I got this final colored version, I was like, this is Riri. How did you go through that process of choosing the colors, and where the fur goes, where the more turquoise colors and the blue goes, the purple colors, things like that? How did you decide that, and how does such a process work for you?
Right. Well, the basic colors, the overall sort of color scheme, came very much from your notes and the photographic references that you provided, both from the sea angels, where you see their kind of coloration, especially around the head and the horns, and then some of the hummingbird references that you gave me that are on the body and the wings. But again, as I said, with the design of the creature, where you can't just take all these different bits and just chuck them together and hope it's going to work. You can't just take colors from all these different animals and just combine them. So what I did was, initially, the final illustration is done digitally. I paint digitally. And that means I'm able to actually sample colors directly from the photographic references that you provided. So I know that I've got that accurate color. So the first thing I do is to bring in the colours directly from your photo references,
Okay.
and just place them on the sketch. And it's only when you've got those colours next to each other that you can then start to see what works and what doesn't. And so then I go through a process of just kind of tweaking and adjusting those colours. Either the actual colour itself maybe making something more blue versus green, or more green versus blue, but also the intensity and the richness of those colours. So, for example, the blues and greens on the feathers, you'd want to be quite intense. But you don't necessarily want such intense colours around the face, because that can look very artificial and distracting.
Yeah.
And the same on things like the tactile pads, for example. You look at any animal, the fingers, the toes tend to be more, there are exceptions, but they tend to be more neutrally coloured. And so it was really just again, this kind of finding this balance between what you'd requested in the form of your notes and your references, and what actually worked on the page. And then there's all other things, you referring back to nature, you look at brightly coloured birds and where those colours tend to be. And in the case of birds, the strongest colours tend to be on the wing feathers and also on the scapular feathers, the feathers around the shoulder area of the bird. That's where you tend to get these kind of bright iridescent colours. And then less so as you kind of move away from those areas, the colours tend to become slightly more muted. So again, that's something that I did with the Flutter Nymph. And it's I go through a constant process of revision. And it's one of the beauties of working digitally, is that I can be refining and tweaking those colours right up until the very end of the process. It's not like with an oil painting, you kind of put the paint down and you're sort of committed at that point. I keep tweaking and adjusting these things. And again, you mentioned the background there, and I always try and put a background in, even if it's not the final background. I always put a background in very, very early in the process, because again, you can kind of just draw little bits of colour from the background onto the animal, and again, that just kind of sits it in its environment and makes it feel like it belongs somewhere. It's not just a drawing on a blank page. It's an animal in its environment, and so that was an important part of the process for me as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I like about the background is that these tiny specks that you brought into it, and it reminded me of also the magical residue that the Flutter Nymphs leave behind in their flight. What do you see if you see those specks? What made you bring them in? It was a
deliberate decision, because the idea behind them is that they are just sort of particles in the air, sort of like specks of dust or pollen, sort of backlit by the sun that glow. I mean, and you see that in nature now. If you go out at the right time of day, early morning when the pollen's in the air and the sun's low in the sky, you do get. But it also does look like magic.
Yeah.
And so I was conscious when I did it. It was a deliberate thing. It's got that almost that double meaning, if you like. On the one hand, it's absolutely naturalistic and believable. That stuff really does happen in the real world.
Yeah.
But it's also magic. It's real magic, and so it was a way. And again, right back to the kind of the core of what we're talking about here, in the idea of Riri being both a magical creature, but also a real creature, a believable physical creature.
Exactly.
And so again, a way of bringing. And it's things that I like to do. I even sometimes do it in my paleo artwork when it's supposed to be serious. Is I'll introduce these little things. It can be specks of dust in the air, or the way that light sparkles on the water, or all these little things that just occur naturally in nature, but just give it that little sort of magical feel.
Awesome. Now, there's one thing that I was surprised by, and for me, it gives that extra sense of cuteness with the Flutter Nymph and with Riri. It's those whisker-like things. What made you think? What was the inspiration for you to bring that into Riri and into the Flutter Nymphs?
That again was a sort of a tie back to my scientific work, if you like, in that those feather-like structures occur in a lot of birds, and they perform the same function as whiskers on a cat or a dog. They're kind of sensory organs. Especially in the context of something like Riri, who exists at least partially in a forest woodland environment. where things are very, very close. You need to be able to navigate your way through branches and through foliage and whatever. We see that a lot now in existing birds today, especially woodland birds. They have these. They're actually called rictal bristles rather than whiskers, but and they extend out, and they just allow them to kind of sense their. It gives them an extra sense of the space around them and allows them to just to navigate through their world. And it was just again a way of just adding that extra little element of interest in the same way we talked earlier about adding the skirt to the tail, just to add that extra something that you might not have expected.
Yeah.
Again, adding those whiskers, you might not necessarily expect them to be on that kind of animal, and yet by adding them, I think it works. It works visually. It makes sense in terms of her behaviour, and it's just giving the viewer something that they might not have expected.
Yeah.
I suppose if we tie it all back to our earlier conversation about generative AI, that's one of those things that AI would never have given you, because most people aren't aware that these structures, these whisker-like structures, even exist. And so expecting AI to give you something that you didn't even know existed yourself, it is clearly not going to happen, because AI can't bring that level of insight and background kind of expertise to the subject.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I do a lot of my dragon work actually as well, is to add these whiskers, because people just think, well, dragons are reptiles, they don't have whiskers, but they can. And again, in the fossil record, we've got dinosaurs with whiskers. These things make sense.
Awesome. I like that you can grab back to those records and the wonders that we already have here on Earth to make creatures like this. It's awesome. I mean,
it's one thing I'm always struck by in my work, in that no matter how fantastical we make our creatures, whenever I'm out gathering references for what I'm going to do, you go through and you find, no matter how crazy your idea, you can bet that nature has already done something far crazier than anything you ever dreamt up. It's all out there, and it's stranger and weirder and more beautiful than a lot of people realize, but it's all real. It's out there.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I remember last year, I think I saw a video of either NOAA, NOAA, or the Ambari Institute. I don't remember which of the two. They had made a discovery on the sea bottom. It was a golden orb, but it was a natural thing. And they as far as I know, they haven't discovered the creature that was in it, because it was broken open when they found it. But that's not something you find normally, and they just happened upon it because they were looking for something else, sea stars and other things that were in the neighborhood, and then they found it and they were like, "What's that?" And that's just here on Earth, and it's exactly what you say. Nature here on Earth can give us so many surprises.
Yeah, and there's one amazing video again from a deep sea submersible.
Yeah.
Again a few years ago, and it was sort of pitch black, and they had their lights on, and there was nothing there, and just for half a second or a second, this weird thing just kind of swims past the camera.
Oh, and wow!
The scientists, they've never seen it before. They've never seen it since. There's a chance I'll never see it again, because this was right down in like the real far depths where we almost never go. This thing completely, and it looked again completely alien, completely new to science. It was on screen for less than a second, and it's gone again. And you think, well, if that could happen, how much more's down there? Because we spent so little time down there, and the oceans are so vast, and we've got 1 second of film to show that this creature even exists. Yeah. And there's so much that we're missing. So much.
Exactly. Yeah, it's incredible, and we take things oftentimes for granted. Well, we shouldn't. There is so much that we still don't know of our forests and of our oceans and rivers and everything. There's a cave in Mexico, I think, where you have creatures that are almost translucent, but also they have no eyes because it's dark in the cave. So
eyes are useless to them. So they have other sensory organs that can help them navigate through the cave and can help them find food and things like that. And I saw that and I was like, okay, that's also very interesting, because how would you go about that? I mean, if you were thrust into a dark cave and without a flashlight or anything, you can't see. So how would you go about that? And this creature here on Earth showed us how to do that.
Yeah.
And that's just so incredible. And we should cherish our nature.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's incredible. Andy, thank you very much for explaining how the art process works. And for those of you in the audience, if you are interested in Andy's work, be sure to check out the link in the description box below, because I linked it to Andy's site and Andy's shop, where you can find all the books that Andy has made so far. And Andy, how many books did you make so far?
I start losing count. At the moment, I've got 8 dragon themed books and a 9th one coming out in the next couple of months. I've also got, I think, about 5 or 6 sort of paleo art or dinosaur themed books. And again, I'm sort of working on another one of those in the background at the moment. So yeah, I've got about a dozen, 13, 14 books out there now. And what's nice about them is almost all of those books have been funded via crowdfunding campaigns on Kickstarter. And in those campaigns, as well as asking people for money, I also ask them for their ideas. So all the creatures in my dragon books have all been created in response to suggestions from backers of the campaign, which is always part of the process that I found most rewarding, because although as an artist I'm expected to be the one with all the ideas, what you find is when you give other people who would insist that they're not artists, sometimes say they're not creative, if you give them the opportunity to come up with ideas, you suddenly discover that actually everyone is creative, everyone has ideas, everyone has an imagination.
Exactly.
And they always come up with things that would never ever have occurred to me, because everyone has their own view of the world and their own things that they're interested in and their own references. And so that's really, so a lot of people, they look at my books and they go, well, I've got, I don't know how many hundreds of dragons across all the different books that I've done, and no 2 dragons are the same.
Yeah.
And people say to me, how do you come up with all these different ideas? And I have to be honest and say, well, I sort of don't. I mean, I do in a way. And ultimately, I've created all these things.
Yeah.
But I've been blessed by having all this input from all these other people. Literally strangers around the world in a lot of cases, that have just suggested these ideas and given me this kind of spark of inspiration to then develop into the final illustrations. And so that's something that I'm particularly proud of, I guess, in the books, is be able to say, yeah, it's my work, I did it, but there's also, the creativity and the imagination and the inspiration from all these other people that have gone to make these books what they are.
It's so amazing. I mean, I remember that the first drawings I think that I saw of you, the first paintings, were from the dragons. I think Dragons of the Dark Woods. I don't remember. One of the first ones, and I really love them. And it is they are inspirational, and it is incredible that so many people came together to give you all that information, to give you all that inspiration for all those books, and that's so incredible.
Yeah,
and
the Dark Woods was a really interesting one, in that because of the time that it happened, I was actually creating that book and running the campaign right at the height of COVID, right in the middle of the pandemic. It was in 2020. Everyone was locked down, and the world was a pretty sort of dark place for a lot of people. And so the dragons in that book have actually got a slightly darker scarier feel to them, I guess, than a lot of dragons in the other books. And that wasn't such a deliberate thing. That was more probably a reflection of the times that we were living through, and kind of, you know, where people's heads were at that particular point. And there were quite a lot of fantastic and, you know, but quite dark ideas coming out of people, which was made that book what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And you have the project Tepui. How do you spell that? How do you say that?
Yeah. Tepui, yeah.
Tepui, yeah. That was also a great project to be a part of. I love that.
Oh,
and Novosaurs, that seemed to me a combination of your paleo art and a sidestep to sci-fi a little bit.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Novosaurs, for people that don't know, the idea behind that was actually inspired by some real science, but the idea that we can reverse engineer dinosaurs from modern day birds, so that within the DNA of the birds around us today are all the genetic instructions, if you like, needed to make a dinosaur. And it's just a case of being able to kind of flick the switches in the DNA, if you like, and produce dinosaurs from birds. And it's an idea that's been, you know, it's being explored in the real world, and it's also been the subject of various books and movies and whatever else. But I wanted to make a dinosaur book, and I wanted to imagine new dinosaurs living in the world today. But I didn't want to go down the Jurassic Park route, because that's been done and been done better than I could ever do it. And so I went down this idea of dinosaurs reverse engineered from birds, but also then, rather than being huge giant monsters in a theme park, being much smaller animals, the size of chickens, that would be available to consumers as domestic pets, a pet dinosaur, effectively, which just gave me a completely different angle on the whole bringing dinosaurs back to life idea. It was a way of just making it different, making it original. And again, I was able to go to backers of the campaign and say, suggest a bird. And so people were back in, and they were not only donating money, but donating these ideas, saying, can you do a dinosaur inspired by a pheasant or a particular kind of eagle? Or we got some there that even based on tiny hummingbirds that developed into tiny dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a real, like I should say, it was a mixture. It was a direct crossover between my sort of fantasy work and my more scientifically based work.
Yeah.
It produced something that's hopefully quite original. It's
I think it was
pretty popular. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible when art can do that for you, and that's one of the fun things about the Flutter Nymph and Riri also. Just audience, the Flutter Nymph is not a pet. just to say that up front. But imagine that you can hold Riri just in the palm of your hand, because that's essentially how big she is, or how small, I should say. And they can just fly around and be part of your life, and that's just incredible. And in Tergaenae, they also give that wondrous feeling to people, because they don't show themselves that much. And if you look at the Novosaurs and other creatures that you designed, those are all part of imagination and all things that people see because you bring them to life. But it's also something that lives inside us. And like you said, all those ideas that people gave you, that's what lives inside you. And that is the imagination that you have. So for all the authors and world builders and anyone out there, let that imagination go loose, and ask artists for some feedback on the ideas that you have, because a human artist can give you that. And just like you can go to a doctor if you have things that, like wounds and things like that in your story, that you need some additional info about, artist can give you the feedback that you need to really bring your creature to life, even if you don't have it as an artwork. It still can give you the information that you otherwise couldn't get, like Andy and I did with that membrane, with these tiny claws and with the tactile pads and more things. Because I remember, for example, in the beginning, I didn't know if it would be realistic to have fur on Riri, on the Flutter Nymphs. And Andy actually told me about the fur that you can find in paleo art. So yeah, there's so much that artists can help you with.
Yeah, I think it's all about collaboration, and you know, humans, we're collaborative animals. We're better when we do stuff together. And whether it's, in this case, you know, the fantasy work where I get to work with authors like yourself, or on the scientific side where I'm working with PhD professors who know this stuff far better than I ever will, we're able to bring our own insights, our own expertise, and our own insight as human beings to the process. And what emerges from that is always going to be better than what would have come from the work of a single person. And it isn't just about expertise. You don't even need expertise in the subject. It's just that act of two human beings collaborating on something that always produces the best results.
Yeah, that is so true. So thank you, Andy. Thank you so much
Thank you
for this.
No, it's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was for me, it was a surprise that you were willing to do this, because I know that you said on your site that you wouldn't do fantasy art. So I was like, okay, you know, maybe he knows someone who can do this for me. So I was so happy when you decided to do this. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I say it is a thing that generally, as a rule, I don't take on a huge number of fantasy commissions. That's not because I don't want to do them or don't enjoy doing them. It's that a large proportion of my time is taken up with the paleo artwork, and I'm one of those people. I hate saying no to people, so it was easier for me to say don't ask me in the first place than to have to say no. But obviously, I mean, I've known you for years. You've been supporting my work since, I say, pretty much from the beginning.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just that, or obviously that helped, but it was also the fact that, you know, you've been coming to me, not even asking for artwork, but just to run ideas past me and ask little questions as you were developing these characters. And so it was just a real pleasure to be able to contribute to that and be a part of the process.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, everyone, check out the links in the description box below and go buy Andy's artwork. You will not regret it. You will love it. I promise you that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andy, for your time for this interview. And guys, if you have any questions, put them down in the comments and I will send them to Andy so that he can answer them as well. And who knows, in the future, at some point, sometime in the future, I hope that I will be able to make a, how do you call that, a creature index, encyclopedia, whatever. And maybe Andy will have the time to work on that at some point in the future.
I'd love that. I'd love that. I look forward to it.
Perfect. But that will come after the first books have been published. So we've got time for that. So for now, I wish you all, hold it, before I forget. If you are interested in the artwork of Riri, go check out my shop as well, because there you will be able to find the canvas wall art that you can have, and the mugs we have made, and a tote bag off the top of my head. So be sure to check out my shop as well. And I wish you all a wonderful time filled with lots of creativity and magic, and may your works all come true. Have fun, and thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you.